So, good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Trenter. My pronouns are she, they. I am the Learning and Storytelling with the Vision for Volunteering. This webinar this morning is about a technique called ripple effect mapping, which is all about measuring the impact of how you work with volunteers in a kind of innovative, really kind of simple way to help you work out the impact that you guys are having as an organization. Just a little bit of background on me and the Vision. So if you haven't heard of us, the Vision for Volunteering is a 10-year collaborative project designed to create a better future for volunteering. There is our website. Please do go check it out. There's loads of information on there. But essentially what we are trying to do is work with volunteers and people who work with volunteers to say what is working for us right now within the voluntary space, what is not working, and how are we going to get there. So the Vision for Volunteering has 5 themes, and these are the things that we're kind of focusing on as we're looking towards this kind of longer term future for volunteering. And one of the things, so we've been working with people for around the last kind of year, really kind of having different conversations with people about volunteering, about the kind of futures that they want to see, about what's possible, about what's not. And one of the things that really keeps coming up for us is around measuring impact, that this is actually a really difficult space for a lot of people. And we feel that this really kind of really meshes with all of these different themes about how we make sure that our volunteers, people are aware of the impact that volunteers have, and that those volunteers feel appreciated because they understand the impact that they're having, and they are empowered through that knowledge and through that kind of that data that they can have at their fingertips, and so on and so forth. So this is a kind of part of a number of different types of resources that is provided through the Vision for Volunteering for free for anybody who works within the voluntary space. Please do go onto our website, visionforvolunteering.org.uk. We've got loads and loads of other resources on there, including resources around ripple effect mapping, but also other things that are available for you to kind of work with and use in your work with volunteers. So in this session today, I'm going to be covering what ripple effect mapping is and how you kind of create your ripple effect map. At the end of the session, there will be some time set aside for you to kind of have your first stab at creating a ripple effect map. That part of this webinar is optional. You're welcome to stay on the call and do that during the kind of period of time that's set out for this, or you can go away and do it in your own time or off the call if that's what you'd rather. So it's up to you. So let's start at the beginning. You want to measure your impact, and measuring impact can be really difficult, particularly with volunteers, because it's not necessarily something that is easy to quantify. Sometimes you're working with numbers, and that's great. You can measure like the numbers of meals delivered, the number of volunteer hours given, the amount of money that's being brought in. And those things are all really good and positive, and kind of essential to quantify. But actually a lot of the impact of working with volunteers isn't something that's measurable. It's not something that you can put a number against. And it can often involve lots of moving parts. It's something that involves people who are messy and complicated. And so this kind of measuring this work of measuring the impact of work with volunteers can be something that's, I think, quite difficult for some voluntary organizations to articulate. But I think it is just as important as those numbers. Particularly if you're going to be sort of using that data to win hearts and minds, whether it's about kind of recruiting more volunteers or winning people over to kind of the cause that you're working towards. So ripple effect mapping, which you'll see the logos in the bottom left-hand corner, is a technique that was created by an organization that we work quite closely with called People's Voice Media. Is this kind of impact analysis technique that's been designed to capture these ripples of impact that are either difficult to measure or that don't happen immediately, or that are kind of maybe they're kind of difficult to connect solidly to a particular action that you took or a particular decision or a particular kind of funded activity. So it's been specially designed for community-based projects and programs, such as working with volunteers. And it involves people who are part of the process. So I don't know how many people here are on the call with people from their organization, but really ripple effect mapping works best as something that is collaborative and involves lots and lots of different people. And it's a visual technique. So you end up with a big image, which is your map and shows those ripples. So the method is participatory and interactive, so it involves you, it involves other people. It's iterative and conclusive, so it can be used at any point during your project. You can use it right at the beginning to sort of say what are the sort of really initial things that you're seeing. It can be used in the middle, and it can be used at the end. And actually, it can be a really interesting technique to kind of revisit as you go, to see the difference in the effects or the kind of progression of those effects that you're having over time. But ripple effect mapping is also a really flexible technique. So you'll see in a second when I show you some examples, it can look however you like, however best fits for your brain or best fits the needs of your organization, and best fits your needs. So as I said, ripple effect mapping works best when it's collaborative. So really, you should be creating your map with a group of people who are all involved within the same organization or the same project, or whatever it is you're trying to evaluate with your map. And really, you want as many different perspectives as you possibly can. So invite your CEO, invite your volunteers, your volunteer manager should probably be there, members of the community who maybe are beneficiaries of the services that you're delivering, anyone and everybody who can kind of give a perspective on what has been happening and has been kind of like involved in feeling the results of the work that you've been doing can and should be involved in creating your ripple effect map. And the more people that you involve, the kind of stronger and more cohesive your ripple effect map will end up being. So what are ripples? What are we actually talking about when we talk about ripples? So these are the impacts of your actions or the impacts of the decisions that you make. And then we're talking about the impacts of those impacts and then the impacts of those impacts and so on. So we took this action, because of that, this happened. And because that happened, this other thing then happened after that. And you can see how when you start to think about it in this way, these things can really kind of snowball. And it can really kind of help you reach impacts that may not have been so obvious on kind of first viewing when you first start to think about your impact. And these ripples can be something really simple, or it could be something a bit more complex. It could be something that's personal to kind of like one individual, or it could be something that had an impact on the organization. It could be something that had an impact on the community. They could be new actions that you've taken as a result of an original action, or they could be measurable outcomes. You can use a ripple effect map to kind of include those numbers that you can measure as well. So this is a kind of example of the types of ways that you should be thinking about ripples when you're creating your map. So you start from one thing. So the example that we've started with here is that somebody went to a Vision for Volunteering workshop and decided that they wanted to change their recruitment processes to open up their access to their volunteering roles. That's the starting point. So what happened because of that? So because of that, we started accepting video applications. We formed a partnership with a local temple to try and get small volunteers in, and introduced entrance interviews to really work with the volunteers to build a role that works around them, rather than kind of slotting somebody into a pre-existing role. That's our first layer of ripples. Then what happened next? So because we started accepting video applications, we saw an increase in applications. And you can give the figures if you have those. When we measured the diversity of our volunteers, actually we found that we've got a more diverse range of people working with the organisation now. And that could be under any kind of category. You've got volunteers taking on new roles. So it might be that you've attracted some younger volunteers, and that means that they're interested in specifically kind of social media stuff, which wasn't something that you had before. And then at the bottom, we see a kind of example of a really individual ripple. So this lady called Katie started volunteering with us because we were able to build a role that fit around her kind of specific needs of childcare. And then she's since brought along some of her friends to join the volunteer team as well. So then as a result of all of that, we've recruited 10 new volunteers. We held a Diwali celebration for residents in a care home that we might not have done otherwise, depending on who was on our volunteering team. People learned new things, new skills, had a great time. One of our volunteers has set up a TikTok, which is a new thing for our organisation. We're accepting new donations from a new source. And one of the volunteers has now started on a qualification as a result of volunteering experiences. So from something kind of really small, it really kind of branches out into a whole kind of range of different things, actions and activities and new measurables and kind of individual stories of how people have been impacted by this action that we've taken. And obviously this is just a kind of example of what a ripple branch might look like. You could start with anything that you wanted over on this kind of left-hand side in the blue, and it doesn't have to also just be one action. Obviously the kind of more complex and kind of multifaceted the projects that you're working on, the more kind of different starting points that you might have. And remember also that all of these things overlap. So you might take one action over here and a different action over here, but that doesn't mean that the ripples can't kind of blend together. And for there to be things that happen as a result of multiple actions. So how do you create a ripple effect map? It's very straightforward, and as I said, incredibly flexible. So typically, and you don't have to follow these instructions to the letter, this is just a kind of advice. Typically, you start with your organization or your project or your aim in the center of your page. And then you start to create layers around it. So identify those actions or changes that you've made and position them kind of around your center aim like a mind map. And then identify those ripples of impact that those actions or changes have had, and then write those as another layer around the outside. And then it continues to kind of build until either you run out of space, you can continue on another page if you want to, or you kind of reach the end of your impacts. And it is also worth noting that as you kind of continue to go out, it's possible that some of those impacts may not necessarily have as kind of clear-cut links to the actions that you originally took. It might be that something happened that maybe was a result of an action that you took. Maybe it was a result of outside forces, or maybe it was kind of a combination of all of that. And that's fine too. That's fine to put down and just sort of identify maybe with like a dotted line or something, whatever kind of works for you. Because all of those tell the story of the impact that the work that you're having in this particular space. So these are a couple of examples that you can see on the screen that we created around people's kind of experiences with the vision for volunteering specifically. You can kind of see that there isn't really one way of creating a ripple effect map. These all look very different. They've been created with kind of different routes. Some of them really go out, some of them are more kind of like lines, like parallel lines and things like that. So however you want to create your ripple effect map is a good way to create a ripple effect map. Don't feel like you need to kind of follow any kind of template for you. Also, these examples have been created on paper, but there is absolutely no necessity to create your ripple effect map as a kind of physical thing, especially if you're working with a group of people who might more naturally come together virtually. There are plenty of online tools that you can use to create a kind of digital version of your ripple effect map, which you might prefer, might be neater, might be easier to fit it all in if you've got quite a kind of big level of impact that you're trying to measure. But I'll talk a little bit about some of those tools that you can use in a second. So once you've got your map, there are different things that you can do to enhance it. There's just a couple of ideas here. for what you might want to do. So we've before used things like coloured stickers to indicate whether a change is relating to an individual, whether it's relating to your organization or a kind of wider community change. So if you think back to that kind of example that we had, the one about that individual who was able to volunteer for the first time because a role was built around her childcare hours, that would be an individual change. And an organizational change might be about the fact that we're now accepting video applications. And this wider community change might be, oh, we've done this new Diwali celebration in this care home, which was something that we weren't able to kind of celebrate before. And that can be used to help you kind of categorize your ripples. But it can also be a kind of good at a glance, having a look, where are we as an organization or as a project having the most impact, and where might we want to focus in the future to bring some of those other impacts out. And then another really interesting activity that you can do is to get everybody who's worked on your map to identify which one thing on the map they think is the most significant change. And that's not, there's obviously no right or wrong answer, that's not a competition. Everybody who kind of comes and brings a different perspective to the ripple effect map is going to have a kind of different idea of what that might be. I mean, that might be a really personal thing. Somebody might think actually the most significant change for me was the impact that it had on me, and somebody else might think it's something else. And that can be a way of kind of really picking out your key messages from what can be maybe quite a big and unwieldy map that you have at first glance. So once you have a ripple effect map, what next? So really what this is to demonstrate the impact of your project. And you have a nice kind of visual representation of what that is. So you can either use it as it is, so kind of share this image that you have, this model, or you can use it as a foundation for something else, something maybe a bit more kind of formal, a bit more structured. You might want to create some kind of outcome monitoring or create a logic model or a theory of change. But anything that you need to demonstrate impact, you can use a ripple effect map for. So it could be that you want to keep it as a kind of internal thing that you add to occasionally or recreate once you reach certain milestones in a project. And it's just something kind of for you guys to kind of, keep the focus on where the impact is. But its uses are kind of infinite. You could use it for demonstrating your impact to funders, for example, or to potential donors, to members of the community, to people who might want to think about volunteering with you. You can use this to kind of draw out some of those stories that you might want to tell. And as I said earlier as well, repeat this exercise. Do it every so often throughout the project, see how those impacts have developed, or get different people in the room and see, maybe you want to do one ripple effect map just with volunteers to say, what do volunteers really think that those impacts are? Do another one with paid members of staff. And then you can kind of compare and contrast how those different perspectives impact the impact, how they see those impacts that you're doing on an everyday basis. Okay, I've thrown a lot of information at you. Really the best way to learn how to make a ripple effect map is by doing it. So as I said at the beginning, we're going to take some time now for you guys to kind of maybe just have a first stab at creating your ripple effect map. So if you've got a pen and paper, perfect. There are some online tools. I don't know if you've heard of things like Miro or Flinger, which are pretty good because they're kind of big whiteboards. You could use Jamboard, although I think Jamboard is disappearing quite soon. So if you do use Jamboard, make sure that you download it because it might disappear quite quickly. So as I said at the beginning, feel free to stay on the call. I'm going to be here. If you'd rather go away and do it yourself, that's also absolutely fine. We've got this time kind of in the diary for you to be able to take as much or as little time over this as you need. So I would suggest that creating a map can take somewhere between 30 minutes or an hour. It really depends on how big the project is, how detailed you're going to be with your ripple effect maps, but also the number of people that you've got involved. I mean, it might be at this point you want to take a kind of slightly more light touch approach to it so that you can then take a first draft to a bigger group of people at a later space. Remember, if you run out of room, you can still keep going. That's absolutely fine. Don't let the size of the paper um, constrict you. And I'm just going to stop the recording there.